everything that you do. I am being joined right now by my friend Matt Kaplan of the Planetary Society. I am sure you have heard his voice. If you have not, go to NPR and follow his program. He is probably one of the best interviewers I've ever heard. I could listen to your voice. Joining him today is also Jim Mazer from Aerojet Rocketdyne, a longtime friend and sponsor of our organization. So, fellas, I am going to give the floor to you. Tell us about what you want to share with our audience today, and take it away, Matt.
Thank you so much, Janet. That was very kind, very generous. And I am Matt Kaplan, the host of Planetary Radio for the Planetary Society, where you can find us at Planetary.org. It's true, though, we are still on public radio in addition to being a podcast. Remember radio? About 120 public radio stations across North America. We are live, as you can tell. Most of you are watching us live, I assume, here coming again from the Humans to Mars 2020 Virtual Summit. And it is my honor over the next 20 minutes or so to have Jim Mazer as my guest. Jim is the Senior Vice President for Space at Aerojet Rocketdyne. And Jim, I want to start with a couple of congratulations, things that have just happened in the last few days. I learned that the engines for Artemis 2, the Space Launch System rocket, SLS, the 4 main engines, those RS-25s, have been completed and are going to be ready to fly?
Yes, absolutely. We're ready to go. And that'll be the first crewed mission of Artemis, taking the astronauts around the moon as a precursor to Artemis 3, where the astronauts will land on the moon. So it's a very exciting time for us. We're very anxious to get back into human spaceflight with NASA.
A little bit more mundane, but still awfully important. Among Aerojet Rocketdyne's many accomplishments, the recent completion of the replacement of those batteries on ISS, the International Space Station, with the lithium-ion batteries, much more capable, as I understand, from Aerojet Rocketdyne. So congrats on that as well.
Yes, thank you. I do want to highlight that because we had the power system on the International Space Station, and they originally had 48 nickel hydrogen batteries. And we worked with NASA and Boeing to upgrade the batteries to more modern technology, which is lithium ion, which is a much more efficient battery. And it's about a 3.5-year process to change out 48 nickel hydrogen batteries with 24 lithium ion. So that's been a very successful effort, and it integrated right into the power system seamlessly. So it was, not many people know we have our power system capability. They think of us as the space business is mostly liquid rocket engines, but we actually have quite a proficiency in integrated power systems.
You must have made the astronauts pretty happy as well, because as I understand it, I mean, I was watching some of it, they were able to complete the EVA work to get these installed ahead of schedule.
Yes, it went very smoothly. I like when my phone isn't ringing during a critical operation, and that all went fine. And in fact, I think so far everything's good to go. And so we look forward to helping stations stay in operation, ideally to the end of the decade at least.
So let's go back to the Artemis program and that effort to get us to the moon before long. I was talking this morning, it was a pre-recorded a segment we were pre-recording with John Mulholland of Boeing, and we were talking a little bit about SLS and about Orion. Aerojet Rocketdyne, you guys have a big part in both of those vehicles. We mentioned the engines on that powerful center core, which are going to get that big rocket up there and hopefully headed toward the moon. Can you talk a little bit more about those RS-25s and what a proven design it is?
Yeah, the RS-25s are derived from the Space Shuttle main engines. So those engines were, for the Space Shuttle, obviously completely reusable. And in fact, basically the shift to SLS Shuttle used 3 Space Shuttle main engines. SLS in the Artemis program uses 4 RS-25s. They're about 500,000 pounds of thrust each. So they provide the core about 2 million pounds of thrust. We have a tremendous amount of heritage. I actually have some stats in front of me I want to read. We actually built 61 development engines, and this would be in the late 60s, early 70s. Well over 1 million seconds of firings. 51 engines have flown. We actually took one engine and we demonstrated we could fire it 10 times in 10 days to demonstrate its reusability as potentially for use on a space plane. And these engines together in the core system will fire about 8 minutes to boost the astronauts up into the high atmosphere and ultimately at the upper stage of the lower orbit and towards to the moon. So there's a tremendous heritage of those engines. And what we've been doing now is, since we have so much experience with them, is actually modernizing the design and also working to manufacture it in a much lower cost way. So we've introduced a lot of additive manufacturing that we've been perfecting over the years. We invested heavily in additive early on, recognizing that our elements of the engines are extremely complex and really not very high volume. So this is additive manufacturing really allows you to make complex components in a low volume way. It's very cost effective. We reduce part count. Our nozzle jacket used to have many different sheet metal pieces welded together with over 30 welds, and now we've reduced it to just 4 cones to get 4 welds basically. So we've focused on maintaining the heritage and reliability of the engine while at the same time making it much more cost effective to produce.
I want to mention a resource I found at rocket.com, the Aerojet Rocketdyne website as well, which is a list of incredible facts about the RS-25. It's really fun and should be pretty easy to find under the Space tab or Space Division at rocket.com. So I knew about the RS-25, like most of the people watching this show. Maybe other people were also aware that there is another very important propulsion device that has space shuttle legacy that's on Orion. I did not know that you're reworking basically what was a shuttle orbital maneuvering system engine as the main engine for Orion.
Yes, that's absolutely true. So that was a reusable engine also. It used a different propellant. The RS-25 uses liquid hydrogen, and that's actually, it's about minus 423 degrees. And if you could imagine, the RS-25 is about 12 feet high, and liquid hydrogen comes in the top at minus 423, liquid oxygen around, minus 293, something like that. And they get mixed together and they go through turbo machinery at thousands of PSI, and then comes out the nozzle, it combusts in the combustion chamber, comes out the nozzle at the other end at 6,000 degrees Fahrenheit, which is enough to boil iron. And so we run liquid hydrogen through the nozzle to keep it cool and to tap off that heat. That's the kind of technology there. The engine used on the Orion main engine uses a propellant we call storable propellants. And those propellants are liquid at room temperature. And they're the kind of propellants that are extremely reliable because the fuel and the oxidizer, when they're mixed together, combust spontaneously on their own. So it's a very reliable start condition that you have, and very reliable and proven and dependable performance on going to the moon. And so the Space Shuttle main engine used those to maneuver the Space Shuttle in space, or the orbital maneuvering system. And now those engines are I think there's 5 left over. There's a total of 14 built, but those are being used for the Orion main engine. And in fact, we have a proposal into NASA to restart the build of those engines as we run through the ones that have been left over from the shuttle program.
Okay, so what we've talked about, at least so far, ISS included actually, nowadays as it prepares us for long duration deep space flight, but certainly Orion, SLS, it seems that we are finally getting close to that point when we will once again be finally leaving low Earth orbit and heading out across the solar system, first to the moon and then hopefully soon to follow Mars. And I just wonder if you have some thoughts about that transition that a lot of us have been looking forward to.
Yes, absolutely. I think, it's I was thinking about that. So you're absolutely right. We're on the verge of embarking upon the next major era of human space exploration and going back beyond low Earth orbit. So we had kind of the moon era where we went, we came back, and then we decided, well, let's develop low Earth orbit. And so in low Earth orbit, we built International Space Station. NASA's now buying cargo and crew launches from SpaceX, Boeing, Northrop Grumman, to take cargo and crew to station. And as they have finished up station and are basically buying these services to low Earth orbit, this is allowing NASA to turn its attention and its resources and its leadership and expertise into going back to the moon, this time to stay there. And the key thing about that is we now have a beyond low Earth orbit vehicle, the Space Launch System, which is specifically designed to take the kinds of masses we need to go to the moon and do things sustainably on the moon. So the Space Launch System itself, the crewed vehicle, the first version of it's going to have an interim cryo-propellant stage that uses one of our RL-10 engines. It's very similar to an upper stage flown on Delta IV. And then there's an upgraded version that will use 4 of our RL-10 engines. But this rocket, in its initial upper stage version, can take about 26 metric tons to translunar injection. And it's the only rocket that can take Orion to the vicinity of the moon. And then when the exploration upper stage, which is the 4-engine system, gets incorporated, this vehicle will be able to take 40 to 45 metric tons. We even have an upgraded version of RL-10 with a higher thrust level. It's currently 24,000 pounds, but we have a 35,000 pound version we've been working on that could take that up to 50 metric tons. The reason that's important, the payload capability of translunar injection, is the more payload capability you have, the simpler your architecture can be and the simpler your landing system can be. So right now, NASA's on a path to use commercial launch vehicles, many of which don't yet exist yet, but their payload capability to the moon is on the order of 15 metric tons. And as they're doing studies on the human landing system, you see them going to more exotic propellants. We've done tons and tons of studies, and we can work with any propellant, any fuel, the hypergolic, kerosene, methane, hydrogen. We believe for in-orbit maneuvering, that storable systems are the most proven. We've used them to go to the moon before and require the least amount of technology development. However, those systems tend to be a little bit heavier. And as you go to lower performance capability vehicles, they have to go to propellants like hydrogen or methane. And that requires a lot of cooling. You have to keep them boiling off. And the engines themselves for going and landing on the moon are not as proven. So I think one of the important things about SLS with its payload capability is you can launch the elements together so they don't have to do rendezvous and proximity operations like you would have to in a smaller vehicle, but you can also use proven propellants and proven engines, and we have a lot of that capability. And then what that allows you to do, if you're not doing technology development to get to the moon, and we already know how to get to the moon, we already have the technology, then you can focus your technology and your resources and all your dollars on how you stay on the moon. Because when we're on the moon, we're going to need power, for instance, and solar power is likely not going to be enough, so you need fission surface power. And then you got to figure out how are you going to transport that power around. On Earth, we do it mostly with cables, but believe it or not, a mile-long cable for transmitting power gets very, very heavy. We've looked at beaming power, but there's a lot of losses with that. So I think we should be investing in that. There's a lot of talk about, what kind of rovers we would have, what kind of habitats. And also there's going to be a little space station around the moon called Gateway. So I think with SLS, it makes getting to the moon very straightforward with storable systems and systems that can be integrated on the ground before launch. But there's plenty of opportunity for the international community and the commercial community to participate in the infrastructure we have on the moon and the infrastructure of Gateway, which is going to be critically important to feeding forward to Mars. So it's a really, really exciting time. But to me and to many of us, it's about going back to the moon, staying there sustainably, and then learning everything we can on the moon on how to go to Mars. And the reason that's important is, low Earth orbit, we've been there for a long time now with space station. That's only a couple hundred miles above the Earth. The moon is 238,000 miles away. And that's quite a bit different in terms of how long it takes to get there, communications and that sort of thing. But it's still relatively close to the Earth. Mars, on average, or its closest, is on the order of 140 million miles. And so proving out how to live remotely from the Earth, but not too far, is a great way to be a proving ground for how to eventually go and stay on Mars.
Yeah, I'm one of those who has come around to agreeing that figuring out how to do stuff on the moon is going to be almost essential in getting us so much farther out to the red planet. We're talking with Jim Macer, of course, of Aerojet Rocketdyne. I just want to mention we did get one question that's come in that I'll get to in just a moment from our audience. But if you're watching and you have a question for Jim about Aerojet Rocketdyne's work or anything else that we've been talking about, you can type it in on the chat window that's in front of you there, the Q&A, I should say. And Janet Ivey will be getting it over to me, and we'll get to as many of those as we can. I have heard, Jim, I guess they like what they've heard so far. We've been granted a few extra minutes here, so we might just be able to go for an extra 5 or so, I'd say. Here's a question from Roger Roy, who's asking you, Jim, any thoughts on how developing the Artemis system engine was different from developing the Space Shuttle main engines? I think you've addressed that somewhat because it's largely the same device, the same rocket motor, but some of these improvements that have been made. And it's an entirely new control system, new electronics for the rocket, right?
Yes, that's right. We worked with a supplier, Honeywell, to build a new engine controller to modernize the electronics. You can imagine from the kinds of electronics we had. And it was updated over the years, but going from the 70s into a completely digital controller now has been upgraded. And of course, a big part of what our engines are about are health management and health monitoring, because we want to be sure if there's anything potentially going wrong with the engines. And we virtually had flawless missions on all shuttle missions for the Space Shuttle main engines, but should anything go wrong with those engines, we would want to gracefully shut them down. And depending on where you are in the mission, you could, there's 4 engines you could shift over and fly with 3 missions. In fact, in shuttle, we did that all the time. There were certain points in the flight that you could shut down one of the 3 engines and still continue to make it into orbit. There's a lot of logic that goes into that, making sure that we're operating safely with that. And then one of the other things we're doing is I talked about the nozzle. That nozzle today is currently made of 1,080 tubes that go around that the fluid runs through. And those tubes are individually formed and they fit very precisely into kind of the cone of the nozzle. And then we run a process called brazing, which is where we put metal in between the jacket and the tubes and put it under high pressure and high heat. And that basically fuses the tubes together and fuses it to the jacket. We have another manufacturing method where instead of using tubes, we can just take a thick kind of cone and machine channels in that cone and then braze the jacket to the nozzle. And so the fluid would flow a little bit differently through that, but we have a lot of models for that. But that would be much less piece parts, much less labor, ideally the same performance, might be a little bit heavier, but much lower cost way to make it. So we're continuing to invest some of our IRAD money and work with NASA to continue to evolve the engine into a much more cost-effective engine that still maintains all its performance and all its reliability that we've garnished over the years.
More questions are coming in, Jim. Here's one from Beth Terra. How would you build a moon or Mars base without humans? I assume that's what it means here. I'm paraphrasing a bit. When AI tech is not yet in sight to build it automatically. I mean, there's been a lot of talk about robotic construction, both on the moon and on Mars. I think Beth is just demonstrating once again that humans are going to continue to be best at what they do for a long time.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I don't think it's exclusively humans, right? I think, as I talked about what we should be focusing our technology on, and this is where I'm looking at, we see kind of some technologies that we're working on, but what I really would like to see is a very strong and integrated technology roadmap that aligns with what we want to do on the moon and then what we want to do on Mars. And I think we have, I talked about surface power. Autonomy is another area where definitely we should be investing, because I think we all agree if we can do precursor missions autonomously to Mars, precursor missions to potentially build structures that would be habitats for us,
Make
etc.
rocket fuel. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Precursor missions to make rocket fuel, and I think that's probably one of the longest poles in the tent. We talk a lot about in situ resource utilization, which I think is key. But I think, you know, if we want to go soon, we're going to have to learn to live on the moon and live on Mars without ISRU in the near term. I think as we continue to invest in that, I mean, I was actually reading in some of the proceedings from the 7th Community Workshop for Achievability and Sustainability of Human Exploration on Mars. I was reading through that, and there's a big talk about, you know, so we know there's ice on the moon and in the craters and on Mars. The question is what kind of form is it in? And they talk about is it in a form that we can refine into something that can be used? And so that's very important to know that, but we don't know it right now. We need to do all the precursor work for that. But in the meantime, we're going to have to learn to stay on the moon and stay on Mars until we can develop that technology. So I think there's a list of technologies that we need to develop, one for sustainable moon that feed forward to Mars. The other is what's relatively unique to Mars that we need to develop, and lay out a strong timeline and what I would argue is funding profile and direction to mature these technologies so that we know when they're going to be ready and that we have plans in our architectures to utilize them when they are ready.
Makes sense. As usual for sessions like this, we're getting more questions than we're going to be able to get to in the roughly 5 minutes that we have left. There is one that I want to get to, and I'm doing this selfishly because I'm from the Planetary Society, and we're excited about the exploration of other bodies in our solar system, robotic exploration, like the OSIRIS-REx mission that's underway now. In fact, we'll be collecting its sample in October. But I see that you folks are providing the electric propulsion, the solar electric propulsion for DART, the Double Asteroid Redirect Test, that is going to launch in less than a year, July of next year, which is going to be a really exciting mission. We're going to nudge an asteroid.
Yes, this is a really exciting mission. We have what we call it. It's electric propulsion, and it's called a gridded ion thruster, and it's technology that we've been working with NASA Glenn on for a while now. But this is really the first gridded ion thruster that's been built to be flown, I think, ever. And we also have the chemical propulsion system on the spacecraft too. So it has a mix of chemical and electric propulsion. But yeah, this spacecraft is going to go out. It's called Double Asteroid because there's two asteroids, a smaller one and a larger one. And the smaller one's circling around the larger one. We're going to go out and bump it and see how far we move it with basically momentum, with delta V and mass. And the reason this is that the double asteroid is we'll be able to measure the relative change in motion from the asteroid we bumped to the one we didn't bump. So it's going to be a very cool mission. We'll launch next year, and it'll be really interesting to see how the actual mission plays back relative to the physics and the science of it. So it's literally a planetary protection experiment.
Absolutely.
Going to Mars, I can't help myself on this one because the Perseverance rover just launched recently, and that launched on an Atlas V that had our solid rocket motors on it, had an RL-10 hydrogen upper stage engine on it, had our chemical thrusters for reaction control on the upper stage, but also has chemical thrusters on the spacecraft. And in fact, this is going to be one of those missions like you've seen before, where the rover comes in. There's it's called a sky crane, and it'll swoop down, hover above the surface of Mars. And then it'll lower the rover down and then fly away. And those are our thrusters. So after that long journey, these thrusters have to hover while we lower the rover down. And then that rover actually has our power on it. We make radioisotope thermoelectric generators.
The RTGs, yeah.
To convert heat to electricity. In fact, I tell everybody, if you've ever seen The Martian, it's that thing that kept Matt Damon warm.
Right.
And so that's our power system that we have that we're powering the rover on Mars.
Absolutely, yeah. Looking forward to those 7 minutes of terror coming up in February when that sky crane gets to do again what it did so well for Curiosity. We are just about out of time. I got just one more question for you. As you know, Aerojet Rocketdyne is a major sponsor of Humans to Mars again this year, and we are very grateful. And I just wanted to see if you have anything to say about why supporting this kind of event is a priority for Aerojet.
Well, obviously, all science spacecraft that have gone to any planet in the solar system have gone with our propulsion. And so we have a long history of exploration, but also a long history of human spaceflight. So it's very important for us to be part of human spaceflight in low Earth orbit, beyond low Earth orbit to the moon and to Mars and to anywhere else we go. And we're involved in all the technologies. We work across all kinds of different propellant ranges. I talk about hydrogen, kerosene, methane. We do electric propulsion, chemical propulsion. We do nuclear thermal propulsion. We're looking at nuclear electric propulsion. And, the currency of space travel is ultimately, right now, at least until we figure something else out, is ultimately propulsion and thrusters and engines. And we do from tenths of a pound of thrust up to well over 1 million pounds of thrust. And so human space flight's in our blood. Reliable and safe human space flight is in our blood. And it is our number one strategic goal that if it's a human space flight, we have to be part of it. So it's very exciting. I have children that are freshmen, they're starting their sophomore year in college. And I told them I was going to do a panel on humans to Mars. They think that's so wild, and I do too. But,
They're right. Yeah.
We can absolutely go do it. We want to be part of it. And when I spoke in May of 2019, I talked about constancy of purpose. And I think to get there, that's really all we need. Is let's stay focused. We've got the right model of LEO, Moon, and Mars, and let's just keep focusing and investing in the technology, and we'll get there. And I want to be part of it. I'd like my children to be part of it, and I certainly want Aerojet Rocketdyne to be part of it.
Jim, I look forward to someday an announcement from Aerojet Rocketdyne that you've perfected those warp engines we're going to need to get out there even further. But we'll settle for all those great solutions that the company has developed and implemented already. Thank you so much for being part of this. And thank you to Aerojet Rocketdyne for your sponsorship of Humans to Mars in 2020.
Absolutely our pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you,
And
Jim.